Welcome to the Eleusinia Mushroom Cultivation course, part 4. In this section, we will cover inoculation. In the previous section, we prepared these grain jars, and now they contain sterilized or very close to sterilized grains that are cooked and hydrated and ready to be inoculated with spores. Okay, so let's go over the supply list. If you visited our retreat in person, you will have this in your care package, but if you're just joining us from YouTube, you're going to have to find yourself. Let's start with the biggest item. This right here is a still air box, which is a homemade item. It is a storage container. Let's see. A storage container that has had 2 holes cut in it for me to insert my arms. And its purpose is to create an area where there's no circulating air to deposit spores on my work area, because you constantly always have spores circulating in the air pretty much anywhere, in your home, outside, anywhere. And that could contaminate whatever we're working on. Next, we have a pair of gloves, micropore tape, a spray bottle of 70% alcohol solution. Has to be 70%. If it's any more or any less, it's not good. Sometimes people think that a 90 or 99% alcohol solution is better. That is not true. If a higher percentage of alcohol will evaporate faster, and therefore it won't work to kill microorganisms. And then we also have a spore syringe with Psilocybe cubensis that we have ordered, along with a needle. Our first step here is going to be load everything up into the still air box that is going to go. So all of the grain jars, the syringe, and the needle. And now all of this has to be doused in the alcohol solution. And you have to really, really get in there and douse it good. You can never use too much alcohol in this situation. Actually, in the whole situation of mushroom cultivation, you can never use too much alcohol. You want to get in there on everything and really, really douse it good. Every surface, every angle, make sure it gets covered. Okay, now that I have everything loaded up into the still air box, I put on my gloves and I want to douse the outside of my gloves with the rubbing alcohol. My goal is to remove my hands from the still air box as little as possible, and if I do, before inserting them back in, to give them a little spray with alcohol. Okay, let's check out. Okay, you want to give your syringe a good shake to evenly distribute any of the spores inside. So to get started, I'm going to open up the needle package part way, and I'm going to turn and unscrew the cap to the syringe. Make sure that everyone can see. Pull off the cap to the syringe and screw on the needle cap. Pull off the paper and pull off the plastic cap. Now I am going to take the needle and pierce the tape and insert a small amount, it only really takes a few drops, but let's say about 1 cc into each container. We don't want to put too much liquid in there because we don't want to change the balance of liquid. Remember, we measured the water that we were mixing in with the grains very, very precisely. And if we put too much extra liquid in there, then that will definitely change. And it really only takes a very, very small amount of spore solution to start growth. So I'm going to go one by one. And then when I'm done, I'm going to put this cover back on the tip of the needle. I can reuse that needle if I want. I would just have to flame sterilize it. I'm going to give that tape a couple of minutes to dry a little bit and then put another piece of micropore tape to cover the hole that I made. Okay, now it's had a little bit of time to dry. Let's get those holes covered. Okay, each hole is safely covered. And here's the other jar that we have that's sort of on its way with mycelium growing. After you get these set and colonizing, you really sort of want to leave it undisturbed. We haven't really been treating this one really all that nice, taking it out for these videos, but it's worth it. So after this jar has grown, at least about 50% or so, when this white has covered about 50% of the jar, I'm going to take it and give it a nice shake to evenly distribute all the colonized grain throughout the jar. The mycelium has a tendency to do something commercial mushroom growers call it sectoring, as in they will make like a border to its growth and then not grow past that border. So if you don't give it a good shake, you might end up with like patchy growth in sections that just will not grow past. Right now, after these have been inoculated, we are in what is called the colonizing stage. And if you remember from the first video, the colonizing stage is when the mycelium is growing inside of a cow patty. So during this stage, we want to keep the mycelium relatively warm. Optimal colonizing temperature is about 80 degrees. You can get yourself a temperature gauge, something to keep an eye on the temperature as they go. But the optimal colonizing stage temperature is about 80 degrees. It should stay warm. Now, I pay attention to this part because later on, when we get to the fruiting stage, there will be a significant change in temperature. When it comes time to the fruiting stage, you're going to want to drop that temperature down to about 72 degrees. So just right now, while the mycelium is growing and digesting this grain, we want to keep it at about 80 degrees. So let's talk about how to care for these jars while the mycelium is growing. We talked about how the ideal temperature is about 80 degrees while they're colonizing, but you don't want to necessarily place the jars directly onto a heating pad. The mycelium produces its own heat as it grows, and it can be very easy for it to build up a little bit too much heat and cause actual mycelium death. So I keep mine in a sterilite container, just like this one, but without the holes. What you could do is actually take this container that you got with your kit, if you're not planning on doing any more inoculations, and you could just use that. I just cover it with some towels to help keep it insulated and let it just grow inside there. This will also depend a little bit on the temperature in your home, in the environment. If it is relatively cold, I do sometimes place the container itself on a heating pad, but I don't place the jars directly on the heating pad itself. Now, you're going to want to keep in mind that patience is key when it comes to growing mushrooms. They really respond the best to what I call benign neglect. As in, you want to, after you do what you have to do, is this inoculation part, and you've taken care of setting up the grains correctly, you just need to leave them be and let them do their thing. Inoculating these jars with spores, it is pretty difficult to say exactly how long this process is going to take. I've had jars that have been very slow starters. I have some that have taken off super fast, and this progress that you see right here. This one is about 10 days. It's okay for you to leave the mycelium growing a little bit longer after it's turned like completely white. It's okay to leave it in for a few more weeks. It's not a big deal. That is much more preferable than taking out the grains and setting them to colonize with the cocoa coir early. Uncolonized grain is a liability as soon as we take it out of these jars. The next steps that we're going to take will be mixing with the other two substrate, which is cocoa coir and vermiculite. And this technique that we're going through here is limited risks as much as possible, because the cocoa coir and the vermiculite are very nutritionally poor. They don't really grow very much of anything all by themselves. So our goal here is we want all of the food sources, which is the grains, to be completely colonized and claimed by the mycelium. Now, the mycelium itself has its own natural enzymes and its own natural defense system that helps keep away contaminants. But if you take this grain out of the jar and mix it with the cocoa coir before it is actually ready, then you are opening up that uncolonized grain to potential contaminants that would contamination in the air that could land on it and then ruin your whole project. So it is better to let this jar over colonize as opposed to taking the grains out before it's completely finished. Now, because we've inoculated these jars with spores, we're not necessarily going to get even growth. Some of these jars are going to be ready before others. Some of them might even fail. They might stall out and fail. There's obviously no guarantees in life. Any type of lingering contamination or bacterial growth or yeast growth in there could interfere with the mycelium growth. In your case, we gave you more jars than you actually need to fill the fruiting chamber size that you have. So if you have, I would say if 2 of these jars fail, you're still good to go to finish your project. And if you really are stressed about it and let's say you have a serious pain condition and you don't want to run any chance, like you have a headache cycle coming up, you don't want to take any chances, you can get some extra jars, you can get some extra grain and start some side projects that just have a contingency plan. I've had some projects that I've done that I don't really have an explanation as to why they failed. Things can happen. And also, definitely with spores, you can't be sure what you're going to get. Are you going to get a really good producer, or are you going to get something that's sort of a dud? You can't really know. But in a way, the setup that we have for you here is almost like having a contingency plan, because if 2 of these jars fail, you're still set to go. Thanks for joining us, and subscribe for more videos.